Like a lot of kids who grew up in the 90s, one of my earliest exposures to the world of animation was watching The Simpsons. Despite technically being made for adults, The Simpsons was a cartoon that managed to appeal to the whole family through its depiction of various generations of a dysfunctional American family going about their everyday lives and encountering weird and wonderful conflicts. Without a doubt, The Simpsons is a beloved staple of 90s pop culture, and paved the way for numerous modern cartoons aimed towards adults. And if it had ended somewhere around season 9, then I'm sure this video would be nothing but praise and adoration. But unfortunately, as of this video, the show is currently on its 32nd season. It's pretty much widely known at this point that The Simpsons of the modern era simply doesn't compare to the show as it was in the 90s. For most fans, the golden era of the show lasted for the first 8 seasons, with seasons 9 and 10 being somewhat of a transitional period, and seasons 11 and 12 being the first time the show truly took a turn for the worst as some of the genuinely terrible episodes began to air, with the steady decline becoming clearer and clearer the further it continued. Personally, for me, there was never really a point where I deliberately stopped watching the show, but looking around, it seems there are many episodes that people consider to be the beginning of the end. From Homer vs. Dignity to Saddle Sore Galactica, and even as early as the infamous The Principal and the Pauper. Maybe one day I'll cover those episodes as well, but today I wanted to seek out the episode that is widely considered to be the worst. And while that's a tough call given just how many episodes there are, according to IMDb, the lowest rated episode of them all is the infamous Lisa Goes Gaga, on a pitiful rating of 3.9. While I'd never watched this episode before making this review, I'd certainly heard of it, and while I wouldn't say for certain if I thought it was the overall worst episode ever, given there are many candidates for that prize, I can still see why so many think that it is. The episode begins with a narration for some reason, explaining how Lady Gaga's personal train was passing close to Springfield. Now, obviously, for the sake of the plot, she needs a reason to visit. They come up with a perfectly acceptable reason, with her seeing that it supposedly has the lowest self-esteem levels of any town. However, while it would have worked fine for Gaga to simply say, "Oh, that's sad, maybe we should go try to help them," they go unnecessarily overboard with her sense of charity, to the point of giving her psychic powers that can detect loneliness and sadness. Okay. Meanwhile, Springfield Elementary is hosting an award ceremony that sees Lisa win the Most Unpopular Student Award, crushing her spirit in the process. While Lisa is miserable, hope arises when Milhouse shows her that someone on the school message board has been defending her. At first, the obvious answer is that Milhouse is the one behind the account, given he's always had a crush on her. It's revealed that Lisa herself was responsible, which honestly seems like a fairly pointless plot point, given it adds nothing and the kids already didn't like her. It's almost as though the writers hadn't properly thought out enough story to fill out 22 minutes. Hoping to cheer her up, Homer takes her to see Lady Gaga, who has arrived in town, and once again we see Gaga's weird psychic abilities as they sense Lisa's low self-worth. Gaga becomes determined to raise Lisa's spirits, but all her attempts seem to fail. Angry, Lisa lashes out at her, claiming Gaga is only doing this to make herself seem like a hero, and that she doesn't really care about the people she claims to uplift. Gaga prepares to leave town miserable and defeated, but Lisa realizes that being able to let out all her anger allowed her to release her tension and made her feel a lot better, and somehow restored her self-confidence. And thus, the episode ends on a musical number. So, what exactly are the problems here? Well, let's begin with the presentation of Lady Gaga herself. One of the episode's biggest problems is that the writers can't decide if they just want to poke fun at her, or if they practically want to kiss her feet. While they go for the painfully obvious jokes about her eccentric outfits that anyone could have come up with, and occasionally throw in kind of funny jokes about how her attitude towards Lisa's plight is a little shallow, and that her attempts at helping aren't actually as useful as she thinks they are. For the most part, the show still presents her not as a real person or character, but as a guardian angel figure for Lisa who literally has magical psychic powers. It almost feels like the show wants to poke fun at her simply because that's what it's expected to do, but it isn't actually brave enough to offer any kind of commentary on her outside of her just being eccentric, or smart enough to give any kind of message on celebrities being out of touch with the problems of the common people. Which is kinda sad when you consider that The Simpsons of the past actually did put in a lot of thought and effort into such things. Lisa's plotline exists purely for the reason of giving Gaga a plot that makes her look like a saint. Lisa has always been an unpopular child, and has always been aware of it. The award ceremony was an incredibly contrived way of starting off this conflict, and the internet forum is completely redundant given it barely makes an impact. People were already mocking Lisa over the award, so what was the point of introducing the fake truth teller aspect? It would make more sense to just have the internet forum be the catalyst of the plot. Have the conflict arise when Lisa finds a thread about herself on the school's new forum, and have her read pages of all the kids cruelly mocking her. That actually feels like a realistic way of bringing down her self-esteem. Lisa and Gaga coming together is even more contrived, of course, given once again it relies on Gaga having unexplained psychic powers. Like, could you really not think up a better reason for Lisa to just run into her and become her friend? And exactly who I'm supposed to have sympathy for here is kind of unclear. Gaga's attempts at helping do come across as shallow and being more about satisfying her hero complex than actually helping Lisa, but at the same time, Lisa angrily screaming at her still feels unwarranted, given Gaga hasn't really done anything to make her feel bad, and apparently just yelling at Lady Gaga, who once again hasn't done anything to hurt Lisa, is apparently enough to solve the conflict and make her feel better. Also, there's a clearly obvious solution to making Lisa more popular here. Just have her take advantage of the fact that she's hanging out with famous celebrity Lady Gaga. Chances are the other kids would be pretty damn impressed by that. Hell, the whole conflict would make so much more sense if it was about Lisa earning newfound popularity by hanging out with Lady Gaga and acting and dressing up just like her, only to feel conflicted because she doesn't actually want to be like Gaga, and instead would rather the kids just liked her for who she really was, and eventually having to choose between popularity and being true to herself. But that would be an actual story with a purpose, and I don't think the writers really cared enough to come up with such a story. Like, there's a scene where Gaga makes out with Marge for no real reason other than painfully transparent shock value to draw in audiences. And there's just no rhyme or reason or meaning behind it, because the writers aren't looking for reason or meaning. The story and meaning behind it are taking a back seat to just showing off the fact that they have Lady Gaga on the show. Overall, the biggest flaw this episode has is that it's just painfully bland and shallow. It's a desperate attempt to make the show seem relevant by taking a popular guest star and, rather than crafting a legitimate story with funny jokes and relevant comedy, just lazily cobbling together a senseless plot that is so bare bones that it feels completely lackluster and unimpactful. On top of that, there's no B-plot to support it, despite a considerable amount of filler that could have easily been scrapped to support one. And sure, blandness is certainly not the worst trait a show or bad episode can have, but comparing an episode like this to classic Simpsons really puts the show's decline into perspective and makes it all feel, well, kind of sad. One of the strengths of the Golden Era was that it always put its own characters and stories at the forefront. It was a show about a dysfunctional family, not a vessel for showing off celebrities. And a lot of the jokes it told about pop culture were genuinely witty, not just low-hanging fruit that anyone could come up with. You can tell whoever wrote this simply didn't care. They didn't care enough to come up with a decent story. They simply made a contrived bare-bones plot to serve as a way to point at Lady Gaga and yell at the audience, "Hey, look at how relevant we're being!" It's such a far cry from The Simpsons of old, and for that reason, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of pointless to get mad at it. Modern Simpsons is often referred to as zombie Simpsons, because it is like watching a zombified, brainless version of the old show. Some shows that go through seasonal rot become so bad that they outright spoil your experiences of watching the old episodes. But Zombie Simpsons is so bland, so shallow, and so superficial that it hardly feels like an insult because it just doesn't have enough substance to even do that. Don't get me wrong, there are modern Simpsons episodes that I will argue are insultingly bad, but this one is simply a staple of the Zombie Simpsons era, as it's such a bland pile of nothing that it simply can't take anything away from the Simpsons of old. While I will not in any way praise the writers for creating it, I guess, at the end of the day, I am grateful that they made it oh so forgettable. Thanks for watching the video. Since there's a lot to choose from, I'm interested to know, what do you think is the worst episode of The Simpsons? Let me know down below, as I may well review more episodes in future. As always, like, share, subscribe and donate to me on Patreon if you can, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye!